Welcome to this brief overview of leadership principles. My name is Dr. Scott of the Madison School of Professional Development, and I'll be your guide over the next few slides. Our goal is to introduce, or probably better to say reintroduce you, to some of the basic elements of leadership and leadership best practices. Leadership. We all know it when we see it. We know good leadership. We know bad leadership. More likely than not, you've experienced both good and bad leadership, and chances are both experiences, both the good and the bad, left an impression on you and shape your understanding of leadership and leadership roles. But what is leadership? When we try to define it, it becomes a little trickier. For example, we can define leadership simply as the process of leading others. And although the word process is important here, we don't actually learn very much about that process or its purpose. Other simple definitions of leadership often focus on the abilities and skills of leaders, such as leaders inspire, and leaders motivate, and leaders communicate. Often the word effectively is included here to emphasize a leader's mastery of these key leadership skills. More descriptive definitions of leadership begin to include not only leaders, but the followers they influence and inspire. So a more descriptive definition of leadership might be an applied skill set that inspires people to work together to achieve shared goals. But even this definition doesn't tell us very much about how leaders become leaders, or why they become leaders in the first place. We also don't learn very much about how we should go about being a leader, or how to measure success. Basically, we're right back where we started. We know leadership when we see it, but defining it is going to take a little more effort. Rather than define, let's take a look at some different frameworks to help us better understand leadership and leadership principles. One of the most holistic ways to think about leadership is to study theoretical concepts of leadership, how they've changed over time, and how these all impacted our current thinking about leadership. We unfortunately don't have the space or time here in this brief overview for a comprehensive study of theoretical paradigms, but I'll touch on a few to give us some general context and scope. Probably the best place to start is, well, at the beginning, and with the great man theory of the 19th century. Basically, proponents of this theory, starting with the Scottish philosopher Thomas Carlyle, argued that leaders were, well, first off, men, and second, that leaders were born to be leaders and not made through chance or self-improvement. Another key element of the great man theory is the belief in the exceptionalism of successful leaders and the significance of the leader's talents in helping them be successful. In other words, these leaders transcended their followers and the situation and succeeded because of their inherent skills and exceptional talents. The great man theory persisted as the dominant paradigm for quite some time. It wasn't until the 20th century when alternate perspectives on leadership began to take shape. First, with Gordon Allport's trait theory in the 1930s and behavioral leadership theory that emerged from the collective efforts of researchers at several American universities in the 1940s and 1950s. Allport theorized that personalities are made up of units, or traits, that can be categorized through trait assessments such as questionnaires. Building on Allport's theory, other researchers continue to expand the trait model of analysis. Trait theory continues to be a relevant paradigm in both theoretical discussions and practical applications. For example, Robert McCrae and Paul Costa's Big Five personality model, also known as the five-factor personality test, is still a popular assessment tool and is a direct descendant of Allport's trait theory. Trait theory, however, like its predecessor, the great man theory, kept the focus on inherent skills or traits that leaders possess that make them successful. In other words, the focus was still on the leadership skills that we're born with, and not the skills or behaviors we can learn. This is where behavioral leadership theory comes in, and, like trait theory, is also still impactful today and informs a lot of our 21st century leadership schools of thought. For the behaviorist, successful leadership is the application of a set of learned behaviors and skills. Said another way, the key paradigm shift was the notion that individuals could improve their leadership skills and become great leaders by practicing specific behaviors. Building on the behavioralists, throughout the second half of the 20th century, researchers thought about leadership in new ways, with paradigms emerging every decade or so, beginning with the situational leadership and the contingency leadership theorists of the 1960s. Paul Hersey and Kenneth Blanchard introduced situational leadership and maintained that a leader's effectiveness is dependent on the capabilities of their followers. Fred Fiedler and his contingency theorists added an additional component to the leadership triad, arguing that the situation and the leadership style of the leader is also key to a leader's effectiveness. In the 1980s, more theories emerged, bringing other elements of the leadership equation into focus, such as transformational leadership theory, where effective leaders inspire and transform followers into high-performing teams. Similarly, transactional leadership theory emphasized the need for leaders to build relationships and, here again, inspire followers to perform at optimal levels through goal achievement and a system of rewards. Today, many of these theories are alive and well in various forms and serve as the foundation of many leadership development programs and trainings. And understanding how we have thought about leadership over time can help inform our daily leadership in practice. However, another leadership framework that can help put leadership into perspective is leadership styles. And we'll look at various leadership styles on the next slide. Another way to understand leadership is to think about different leadership styles. We can define a leadership style as the approach that a leader uses to influence others. A leader's leadership style can be either effective or ineffective, depending on different situations. For example, a drill sergeant's approach to shaping new recruits into soldiers probably won't be as effective in a board of directors video conference meeting. Different leadership approaches are needed to match different situations. However, mastering different leadership styles is not as easy as it sounds. And leaders often rely on leadership styles that are, more often than not, shaped by their personality, their values, their practice skills, and their past experiences. Like with leadership theories, we don't have the time or space to explore all leadership styles, but we'll look at a few of the most common. First, I want you to think of leadership styles as a spectrum with 5 quadrants. At one end of the spectrum, we have very controlling leadership styles, and on the other end, we have a hands-off approach to leadership. On the one end of the spectrum, we see leaders whose style is controlling and involved at all levels of their followers' actions and end results. We call this quadrant the autocratic leadership style, where leaders use their authority to dictate and control outputs, often influencing followers through a set of rules and structure. Squarely in the middle of this quadrant is the bureaucratic leadership style, which relies on established hierarchy to ensure consistency. Next on the spectrum is the transactional quadrant, where leaders influence followers through a system of performance-based rewards and, of course, punishments for poor performance. Essentially, transactional leadership, or managerial leadership style, as it is also known, entails engaging in a transaction of rewards for performance. Next on the spectrum, and purposefully placed in the middle of the spectrum, is the transformational quadrant. Transformational leadership styles are numerous, but typically entail leaders inspiring followers to achieve a shared vision or goal. Essentially, transformational leadership styles focus on empowerment and the strategies needed to motivate others to achieve more than they otherwise would have individually or collectively. Different types of transformational leadership styles include visionary leadership, servant leadership, coaching leadership, etc. In the democratic quadrant, leadership styles focus on involving followers in the decision-making process to encourage collaboration and innovation. Essentially, democratic leadership styles empower and motivate followers by giving them ownership in the process or even the business itself. Finally, in the laissez-faire quadrant, we find the polar opposite of the autocratic leadership quadrant. Laissez-faire leadership styles involve minimal leadership engagement or guidance. Team members are therefore free to make their own decisions and work independently. However, though this style can be effective with already high-performing teams, a lack of leadership engagement also involves a lack of accountability or oversight, often leading to a decrease in productivity, incomplete projects, and poor individual or team performance. Another way to categorize leadership is to think about essential leadership characteristics. For example, leaders are decisive, trustworthy, empowering, good communicators, and resilient. We also often think of leaders as intelligent, authentic, sincere, emotionally intelligent, empathetic, self-aware, and adaptive to new situations and experiences. But to be sure, leaders can still be effective without possessing all or even most of these characteristics. In fact, most of the effective leaders in your life were probably actively working on improving in one or more of the areas listed here on this slide. So then, we must acknowledge that leadership is more than theories or styles or even characteristics. Leadership is best thought of as a process. And the process goes a little something like this. Leaders are not born, but followers certainly are. We're all born into the leadership process as followers. As children, we have various leaders in our lives: parents, teachers, older siblings or relatives, and often a community of other adults or role models. On the playground with our age mates and peers, we may experience brief moments of leadership, as one kid or another motivates the rest to accomplish something exceptional, like build a fort or invent a game. But for the most part, we follow and adapt to the flow. Gradually, through things like organized sports and clubs, assuming more responsibilities around the house or getting our first job, or even just the rigors of high school, we get our first real doses of tangible leadership, as either ourselves or one of our peers is called upon to assume a leadership position or rises to the occasion and leads. Through all this, we come to understand what leadership is and what it means to be a leader. But that doesn't make us good leaders, nor does it make us good followers for that matter. But what it does is prepare us for the road that lies ahead. So let's fast forward quite a bit in the process, and let's now find ourselves moving through our careers. If we are good at what we do, we inevitably find ourselves being asked to take on more and more leadership responsibility. Why? Well, because we get good at what we do and we get promoted. But here again, being promoted doesn't make us good leaders. And unfortunately, many leadership pathway programs are terribly inadequate at preparing leaders to lead successfully. So oftentimes, being a successful leader entails a personal commitment to improving as a leader. And this means learning to delegate more and learning to lead rather than do. This is where the process differs for all of us, because we either become better leaders or we don't. It's as simple as that. This is also why we now say that leaders are made, not born. We get better through self-study, by building self-awareness, and by working on key leadership characteristics and learning to apply them appropriately. So at this point, you may be asking, how can I apply all these different perspectives on leadership principles, and what does it truly take to improve as a leader? There is, of course, no single path, nor one size fits all. Depending on our existing individual skill sets, we may see easy gains, or we may struggle with the same issues over and over. So here are a few of my general recommendations that can help make sure you are ready for leadership when it is thrust upon you, or help to continue to enhance your skills in your current leadership role. First, I know we downplayed their overall effectiveness previously, but one obvious place to start would be any corporate leadership trainings you are required to complete by your employer. Getting the most out of these trainings is often a matter of perspective. If you maintain a positive attitude and actively seek to learn something new that you can immediately apply, then you will probably find greater value in the trainings than if you maintain an attitude that this is all just a waste of time. We'll get to self-awareness in just a minute, but learning to assess and adjust your own perceptions and perspectives is also honing a key leadership skill and characteristic in the process. Second, I would recommend a commitment to lifelong learning. If you recall our characteristics list from a previous slide, we highlighted how leaders are adaptive to new situations and experiences. This comes from a dedication to broadening our knowledge and our experiences to incorporate new challenges, new adventures, and greater rewards. Remember, too, that lifelong learning isn't just about earning more advanced degrees or certificates. It's also about constantly identifying things you don't know or haven't tried and, well, giving them a try. So, join a cooking class or a book club. Volunteer. Challenge yourself and learn from your mistakes. Constant improvement and learning is the key to better leadership, lifelong learning, and a happier you. My third recommendation relates to these first two, but deserves its own specific mention, and that is to build self-awareness. Effective leaders are able to quickly gauge and, if necessary, adjust their own emotions or reactions. This comes from building self-awareness, but this skill takes time and practice to master, and, like lifelong learning, is a lifelong endeavor. Being more self-aware allows us to realize when we're dominating a conversation unnecessarily or allowing our emotions to affect our behaviors. And, more importantly, it allows us to realign ourselves and more effectively seek out positive resolutions. The best leaders are good communicators, and so improving your communication skills is my fourth recommendation. From writing emails to giving performance review evaluations, from addressing audiences of stakeholders to managing meetings. The list of scenarios and instances where effective leadership communication is needed is a long one. And there are many, many ways to hone your communication skills, from self-study and practice to earning an advanced degree that requires professional and academic writing style and techniques. The best advice would be to analyze your own weaknesses as a communicator and start there. If writing more effective emails is your goal, you can probably find enough information on the internet to make significant improvements on your own. However, if giving presentations to a packed room of stakeholders makes you quake in fear, then you may want to seek professional training or a mentor. My fifth recommendation would be to constantly build your own brand and your personal reputation. You do this through a history of ethical behavior and a track record of integrity and trustworthiness. It's in the small things, like ensuring that you keep your promises and complete projects and assignments on time and to the required specs. But it is in the big things too, like acts of kindness, empathy, and integrity. All of the prior 5 recommendations are most effective if we learn to develop my 6th recommendation, which is an ongoing self-evaluation and improvement loop. This skill involves regularly reflecting on our actions, both our achievements and progress, as well as our failures and shortcomings. In both cases, we learn and find ways to improve. Different actions we could have taken, different ways we could have responded to a situation and handled it more effectively, etc. This type of ongoing self-evaluation improvement loop allows us to constantly hone different leadership and life skills. But my final recommendation would be to always follow the golden rule of business. You may know this one, but nearly every culture in the world has a version of a golden rule, which in Western cultures, such as mine, we might define as treat others the way you want to be treated. This is, of course, an important rule, and one we should all follow. However, the golden rule of business takes this one step further and focuses on one key way we should treat others. The golden rule of business is be respectful of everyone's time. Above all else, this golden rule of business is an important concept to remember and apply throughout your career and as you build your leadership skills. That brings us to the end of this short overview of leadership principles. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation and have found many useful concepts and applications to take forward with you in your leadership endeavors. To recap, in this video we introduced various ways to think about leadership and leadership principles. We presented several different definitions of leadership. We reviewed a brief synopsis of leadership theories and how they have changed over time. We then looked at leadership styles and leadership characteristics. Finally, we approached leadership as a process and examined various ways to hone our leadership skills and become more successful and effective leaders. I'm Dr. Scott, and it has been a pleasure guiding you through this overview of leadership principles. Until next time, so long, and may all your leadership endeavors be successful.